Hi there. Welcome back to Real Film Chronicles. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And in today's episode, we're going to give you a rundown of our top picks for the films of 2021.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to this. It's not too often I do a top 10 list of things. It is very difficult. This is almost a disclaimer to the next, however long this episode is, but I do not like putting together a ranked list of movies, and especially like a top 10 of the year is very stressful to do. Like, how do you feel about putting in a list of movies for 2021?
Well, part of the challenge for me was actually getting in watches of a lot of 2021 films. I'm usually not the kind of person who is actively chasing down the most recent films. I'm usually kind of all over the map in terms of watching films that I've missed out on in past years and watching old classics. So in order to get enough of a cross section to confidently make a top 10 list, I had to kind of make more of a focus this year on watching kind of newer or more current movies. So sometimes it fell into the trap of almost feeling like homework.
I know exactly what you mean. It was kind of crazy. It's like, I don't think I would have watched this many 2021 films, like the current year films, if it wasn't for this podcast and thinking, oh, we do need to put together an episode around this thing.
It was good though, like any other kind of project, whether it's my Nick Cage project or like my journalism and film project, where just like it's forcing me to maybe watch movies that I wouldn't normally have watched. And I always appreciate those opportunities where I'm kind of forcing myself in a new direction and kind of exploring new stories and new storytelling. So in that respect, it was interesting. I watched some directors that I haven't seen before and some that I had written off that I need to go back and give another look to. So it was quite a journey, actually. It was really, overall, I'm glad that you kind of forced me to do this.
Well, that's what it's all about. It's this journey and trying to get into cinema and movies that we don't normally touch upon. And honestly, it's also difficult for me because a lot of movies come out at the very end of the year, right? It's sort of like that award season of films. And quite frankly, a lot of movies are very difficult to come by. And even up till yesterday, there's still movies coming out and becoming available. It's just like, I just don't have time to watch all these things. Mm-hmm. I don't know how people do it. They have access to different film festivals throughout the year. They have access to screening copies, et cetera, et cetera. But we basically do the best with what we got. And here we are.
This is the problem too with kind of the fracturing of content across. There's so many different streaming platforms now that I just don't have. I don't have the resources to be subscribed to all these streaming sources, and I only have limited funds in terms of buying new movies when they come out. So there are limits in that way as well. But yeah, it's overall. It was fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I got to say, the streaming services were almost kind of a boon here because in a lot of these cases, these movies come out in theaters, very limited run. They'd still be considered a 2021 film, but they come out like Christmas Day or like the day before the end of the new year, where a streaming film is released on the streaming platform and it's just very clearly 2021.
Yeah.
There are movies from 2020 that have that limited release of like December, like late December 2020, that really don't become available until 2021. I think that's a point of contention that we could, film lovers are going to argue forever, is like, is this movie 2021 or is it 2020? Like, what characterizes the release of a movie specifically?
Well, this is the challenge too I found, where a movie like Synchronic, technically released in film festivals in 2019, but not really available for wide release until 2021. So I kept it off my list, even though it was a favorite film I watched this year, just because of that ambiguity. But yeah, there's some. I was having trouble because on Letterboxd, some movies, because I was trying to filter by 2021 movies released in 2021, and there were some movies like, oh, I thought these were released in 2021, and I go somewhere, I look on the back of some of them I have like the Blu-ray copy or the physical copy and it says released in 2021, or I go to IMDb and it says 2021 and somewhere else says 2020 and somewhere else. So like even like I don't think there's like when you get those edge cases around the end of the year or the beginning of the year, I don't think there's like a standard way of defining clearly what comes in what year. Yeah. So sometimes it's a bit of a stretch, or there's some gray areas there.
So I guess if you're listening, let it be known we haven't seen everything. There's some movies that we're not considering eligible. There's some that are going to be 2020 films in here as well. It's just going to be a pretty casual list, I think. Right?
Brian's breaking his own rules already.
I think I might have one or two 2020 films in here that were like, I did my research. They released very late on in 2020. I was like, you know what? For my purposes, this came out in the theater in my area, like February, March of 2021. That's what I'm going with.
Yeah. Also to keep in mind that, we have our day jobs. So we take this list for what it is. I think I watched 40 something 21 films overall. So like my perspective might not be as broad as like say an actual film critic who watched hundreds of new releases in 2021. And I think you doubled my watching rate for 2020. I think you got like 80 or 90 titles under your belt.
I was just over 80 titles in 2021 at the time of recording this. It's kind of absurd.
Yeah. So
that's where it really did feel like homework. Like you said before, there were a couple of weeks there was like, I have to take a break from new films.
Yeah. So take it for what you will. There's still a couple smaller films and indie films that I'm still waiting to get access to that I couldn't.
Yeah.
In terms of like either streaming or physical copies, just couldn't get my hands on yet. And so I'm going to still be watching 2021 films throughout the year. So yeah, this is caveat is like based on the limits of our resources within our limited empire here.
Yeah. So before we jump into the list, do you have any criteria that you want to talk about? Like what criteria these movies had to fit in order to get on the list, or how did you approach making a top 10?
I think partially it was just excellence in just the craft of the film in terms of, the writing and production values and obviously acting and things like cinematography, which, coming from a layman's perspective, as much as I understand about cinematography and acting and whatnot, and just being able to frame a scene. Other criteria I looked at were kind of, uniqueness of the storytelling or uniqueness of, for me, I'm big on, the theme and character and kind of the more kind of literary elements, you might say, just coming from my own personal, educational, academic and professional background. Those are the things that I tend to look for. Projects that kind of, movies that broke the mold, that left a mark on me, that were able to, make me feel something. So because I think that's part of the job of art with a capital A is to evoke those emotional responses. Sometimes it's about purely just like, is this escapism? Is it just a fun ride? Does it have, clearly defined, pointed social commentary / satire? Is it a horror film that's actually scary and, but not that kind of transcend things that essentially movies that also kind of transcend genres or transcend what we think of genre limitations. Anything like that that I found inspired, that I walked away from, that I was scared or that I was sad or that I was happy or that I thought it was like, wow, I never thought about doing that. I never thought that you could tell a story in that way, or things that challenge my point of view or my worldview. That's what I want to come away from when I watch a movie, is that I want to come away thinking is like, oh, was I wrong about this whole time? Or is like, come away from a movie with thinking is like, oh, I'd never thought about this topic in this specific way, or I'd never even known that this topic was something to be discussed or talked about. So kind of all those things. Sometimes it's a bit more ambiguous, that kind of wow factor that undefinable, I wouldn't say undefinable because I'm not an essentialist. I would say that everything's kind of definable, but I guess that kind of wow factor or it factor, as well as like the actual, excellence in technical, performance of pulling up from the writing to the filmmaking to the editing to the acting.
That's that sounds like some pretty fair criteria.
Yeah, what were your criteria?
It's a very personal thing, right? For me, I first created a list of all the movies in 2021 I've seen, and then I tried to rank them. So I have literally like a 1 through 80 list, which I kind of did over the past couple of months. So I watch a movie, I put it in a list, and then just kind of float it in. But when I was putting together this specific top 10, I realized some movies that I had rated even 5 stars, I don't think need to be in my top 10. So I really took a criteria of, am I going to watch this movie again? Is this movie going to be something that I want to revisit? Because I've always said this, that there's a lot of really fantastic movies out there that I recognize as great and I love watching them, but I never have an urge to go back to them. So I really tried to stick with, in this year, because I've made some lists before, this year I've tried to stick with movies that I'm pretty confident I'm going to revisit. There are some standouts for ones, you know, in their technical craft that I think deserve to be put into a list. They really impressed me for different reasons. Sometimes it's just kind of a gut feeling. And I kind of like to have some representation on the list in terms of genres and whatnot. It's like...
Absolutely.
Like superhero movies, for instance. I really enjoy watching superhero films. I don't think I need more than one of them on a top 10 list of the year, right? It's like I don't feel like there's enough room to put that much in there because it's a very specific type of movie. I like what you said about, you know, challenging yourself and expanding your horizons and movies that surprise you. That's what I tried to focus on for this stuff. These movies are probably going to be more memorable moving forward, like 4, 5, 10 years from now. I'm hoping that I remember these movie entries and they stick with me. Where some movies, like I've rated 5 stars, they're probably in my top 3. I may have never revisited those. 10 years later, it's like, what does that say about the movie? Probably says more about me than anything else. But yeah, it's pretty personal. There's a lot of gut feelings. I'm looking at literally like a list of 20 of them. I just start rearranging into a top 10 and then just try and pick out a couple that deserve to be in there.
Yeah, it's always tough evaluating different movies of different genres with different intents and different styles. So really, I thought about it in terms of like my tiers. It was like almost like an upper tier, a middle tier, and a lower tier, where like some of the actual order might be able to change around a little bit. But essentially like almost like those are my, like, that's how I kind of organize it, because I always have a tough time, especially when you have wildly different filmmaking styles and wildly different tones and completely different genres or mixing of genres. And it's like, well, how do you reasonably compare these things? And sometimes it's just a matter of, that's why I rate things in terms of tiers as opposed to like the real, like the top couple for sure I know are like my favorite films of the year, and the bottom ones, the ones you really hate and really love, those are the easy ones. But the ones in between are always, it's a bit more amorphous, and arguments can be made either way to shift them up or down the scale. Yeah.
Like you just said, like some of these are incomparable, like different genre movies. 8 and 9 could be interchangeable. 5 and 10 could be interchangeable. Like it's kind of a cluster, but it is what it is. Are you ready to get started on this thing?
Do we want to give I have a couple honorable mentions before we get into the meat itself. One of them was Old by M. Night Shyamalan.
That could be controversial.
That it wasn't on the list, or that it was even near the list.
That wasn't even near the list. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this, and, you know, I've been a fan of M. Night Shyamalan since the beginning. I know that he's had his ups and downs, and he's, for some reason, I don't know why, but he's taken it on the chin, I think, from critics and audiences when his movies didn't quite pan out. But ever since he kind of came back, because I think the 2 big flops was Avatar, The Last Airbender, his adaptation, the live action adaptation, and then was it After Earth, I think?
Yes, exactly.
Both critical and financial flops, but he came back, I think, with The Visit a couple of years back, and he essentially mortgaged his house to finance this thing. paid off in spades. Same thing. He self-financed in partnership with Blumhouse. But he financed his next ones like Split and Glass, and then Old. But he's been doing all this himself, and they've all been successful. But even when M. Night Shyamalan, even when his movies don't land and they're not perfect, like Old wasn't perfect, but you look at in terms of visual filmmaking. I think M. Night Shyamalan is a master at what he does, and just like framing shots, and composing shots. But even when the things he does don't land for me, I always appreciate when he takes those chances and does something different that in the mainstream Hollywood studio system, you would never see them take those chances or do those things. So I always appreciate, even if I don't always fully enjoy, I'm not always fully on board with his work, I always appreciate that he takes those chances and does something a little bit different. So I want to mention Old, and I want to mention a film called The Mauritanian, which I really struggled. I wanted to put this on my list. I don't know if you've seen this one or not.
I have not. No.
It was about, just briefly, based on a true story, based on an actual book written by the gentleman involved, but he was accused after 9/11 of being one of the co-conspirators of organizing the 9/11 attacks, and he was imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay for, I think, it must have been like a decade at least. Apologies, I'm probably getting some of these facts wrong, but it just looked at, it had Benedict Cumberbatch and Jodie Foster and Shailene Woodley, I think is her name. But it was just, it was really, really powerful, really well done. I don't think it got as much exposure as some other larger films did, but it was just such a powerful story about, being able to endure those kind of hardships. I'm always a sucker for good legal drama, and so like the background back and forth about the legal ins and outs of what it takes to actually clear somebody's name of terrorism, especially in a post 9/11 world. Yeah. And then just examining some very difficult ethical questions about torture and about our current kind of geopolitical states. I think it's an important film that people should see. Didn't quite make my list, but I really feel that it was really, really close, and I was actually pleasantly surprised that both in the film and both in the fact that I had to wrestle. I was struggling to get a top 10 list at first, and then I was struggling to get it back down to 10 because there were a couple of great films that I wanted to put on here, but I couldn't. So I wanted to mention those two specifically before we got into our top 10 proper. Were there any honorable mentions that you had that didn't quite make your list that were so close?
Yeah, you know what? I didn't prepare anything formal. I probably should have, because that's an honorable mention is a good idea. But off the top of my head there, Judas and the Black Messiah did not make my top 10, but definitely could be in there. Like I said before, some of these movies are interchangeable. That movie, I think it was kind of an earlier one in 2021. That one really...
That one too, because everywhere I was looking, it said it was technically a 2020 release. So I tried to... Yeah. It could have been easily on my top 10 as well. I just want... You're absolutely right. It's a great movie. Yeah. But keep going, sorry.
And no, it was really interesting. And it's one of those things where the movie gets me to go out and do some research, which very few movies do. And I want to know more about the events that happened there. I want to know more about this history. I think it was an important subject to shine a spotlight on. I'll just throw out the other movie that did not make my list, but I had a lot of fun with, was Annette, which I was not expecting it to be what it was, and that's a musical. This is a huge hole in my film watching career, and it was just like, I don't watch musical movies. I remember watching Sweeney Todd, 10, 15 years ago, whenever it came out, and I was like, okay, that's fine. But here we are with a movie with Adam Driver and Marion Cotillard making something really interesting. It was an interesting story. I don't know much more about it, but I love the music in it. I love the story. The acting was great. The visuals were incredible. And it was just quirky and weird enough, like with that little bit of like weird humor that really spoke to me, I think. Like, yeah, I won't go into any details on the movie, but I went in not knowing it was a musical. Within 5 minutes, I'm like, do I have to Google, is this a musical? I was like, no, I'm rolling with the flow here. Absolutely loved it, start to finish. I just wasn't sure, is that a top 10 worthy movie? I don't know. It's definitely in like the top 15 of 2021 at least. Definitely a really good film. And if you want to go outside your comfort zone, check out that movie.
Nice. All right, you want to dig into the real meat of this podcast sandwich here?
Let's start with our number 10s, and I can go first if you want.
Yeah, sure. Break the ice there, Brian.
Right, we'll break the ice. This is a little the formalness of the list stresses me out, even just talking about it, right? In any event, my number 10 is The Power of the Dog.
Really?
Right. And this is a movie that took me by surprise. I put it on. I really, again, did not know anything about it. I like to go into these movies, and I think not going to movie theaters and not seeing trailers, it's very easy to avoid the marketing. It's very easy to just avoid the gossip and the hype around a film. Yeah. And I think this one came out straight to streaming service. So I probably put it on in the first week of release, and it really surprised me. I wasn't fully invested at the beginning of the movie, but it really grew on me to the point where at the end of the movie, it's just like, I just witnessed something else. That was really, really interesting. And it kind of stuck with me. I'm not sure how likely it is that I'll go watch it again. I hope in a couple of years I will. I think there were some really good performances coming out of there. The cinematography was fantastic. Directed by Jane Campion, who I understand is quite an accomplished director, and I've never seen anything by her, and I'm compelled to go deeper into her filmography after watching this. Like Benedict Cumberbatch is good. Cody Scott McPhee, really good. The characters in this were really interesting, and it was kind of nice too. It was nice to put a Western onto the top 10 list, right? But this kind of transcends the tropey Western things that I'm accustomed to, right? And I think the movie plays with those tropes of like, what is a cowboy? What is a rancher? It's like, we've seen so many depictions of them, and they're all kind of the same people. This movie upends those expectations and plays with the genre a bit. I thought it was really good. I think this one is going to be up for a lot of our awards, and it definitely deserves them.
Yeah, no, it was a late addition to the list because that's just came out like the tail end. It was like the last couple of days of 2021, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah. And that's the beauty of a streaming service is like, this is going to be an awards that kind of like what they could say is Oscar bait. It's thrown in there at the end of the year to be an awards film, but because it's streaming, I get to actually watch it like right away. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. It didn't have the same impact on me. It was one thing I will say, like a couple things I will say, beautifully shot film, like just amazing. It's like those panoramic views. Were they in Montana? But wherever they were, is like just beautifully shot. Like I love those wide shots. Just beautifully composed shots. The acting again, like Benedict Cumberbatch, Cody Scott McPhee, and of course Kirsten Dunst. I'm glad to see her in more things again.
Yeah,
I feel
great.
that she was kind of missing.
Jesse Plemons.
Jesse Plemons is like, who would have thought that the jerk from Breaking Bad was going to be one of the preeminent actors of our day?
Yeah,
he's actually going to be amazing. In was it Killers of the Flower Moon, or I can't remember the next Scorsese flick coming up, but Jesse Plemons is going to be one of those few fortunate souls who get to work with Martin Scorsese. But overall, I appreciate what Jane Campion was trying to do. Didn't quite land for me. But speaking of which, I did go look up her filmography, and I just had happened to watch In the Cut last year, I think for the first time.
Okay.
That one, actually, I would recommend that In the Cut film from, I think, 2003. I don't know if you would describe it as, I don't know if it'd be an erotic thriller. But it was a great little flick with Mark Ruffalo and Meg Ryan. I can see. I'm definitely on the lookout for more Jane Campion flicks now. I think that's going to be a project this year to check out more of her work.
And for me, like, I was kind of undecided even halfway through this film, but if we're putting it on the list, honestly, it was between this and like 4 other movies. It was just kind of like that's why I kind of wanted to mention that I kind of like getting like genre representation on here. Mm-hmm. And I think because it is a Western and these don't often make my my top list or anything. I wanted to throw it on there, but it deserves a spot somewhere.
Nice.
It was good. And what's your number 10?
My number 10, so this one actually, the Mauritanian was going to be my number 10, and this one kicked it off because I had to put this movie on my top 10, especially after our discussion of it. It was one of the ones we talked about. And after talking it through with you, I think my appreciation and my love for this movie increased a whole lot more. So I had to put The Last Duel on my top 10 list.
Great film.
It's still not my favorite of 2021, but just going back and having discussed with you and looking at all the different themes, and I think we talked about before in terms of my criteria of like challenging my worldview, and looking at, you know, some of the challenges that women are still facing today in terms of some of the hurdles that they're still overcoming in terms of sexual harassment, and sexual assaults, and just the way that they're treated and perceived, and the things they have to worry about that as a white man I don't have to worry about. And, you know, as somebody who's on that journey, who you know, I thought I was pretty far along in terms of being liberal and progressive and accepting these kind of things. And it opened my eyes to things that I hadn't thought about, and made me think about my interactions with women and with other people. And it made me, and I think that caused me to have some of that introspection, not to get too kind of serious or down here, but like have to have that introspection and to kind of make me think, you know, moving forward. It's made me think a bit more about my actions and what I'm saying and what I'm doing. And even though I'm not, you know, directly harming people, like other things that I can do and ways of dialogue that I can engage in that are more positive and more constructive. And just also in terms of just how the film was shot, just beautifully shot, amazing performances. Again, Adam Driver, another one of those actors who's just like, who came out of nowhere and has just become one of, I look forward to each and every one of his performances. Matt Damon and Ben Affleck back together again.
Yeah.
That battle scene at the end was just like one for the ages. It was still
unreal.
Like that battle scene alone gives it a top 10 on this list. It was pretty amazing. And just like playing with the different perspectives. I always enjoyed that, in whether it's in literature or whether it's in movies, but like taking the same events and looking at them from different people's perspectives to get those different thoughts and different ideas. I love that idea. So the fact that, you know, Ridley Scott was able to play with that and create this amazing historical epic that touched on such important themes today. I think it was just a really powerful movie. I'm going to be going back and watching that over and over again. Not an easy watch by any means, considering the subject matter, but an important watch, I think.
You just, my thoughts literally exactly as I say. That is an important watch. And I think it's fantastic that, like, in the hands of Ridley Scott, especially with it speaking towards the structure of the movie. Yeah. Anyone could have just taken the story and told it in a very linear fashion, in a very regular, dramatic fashion, but leave it to, I mean, the writers too, and Ridley Scott's direction to put it together in such a way that was really compelling and so relevant for a movie about events taking place in the 1700s. Yeah. It was so relevant to modern culture, and there's a lot to walk away from. Really, really a solid entry there.
Yeah, so that's my number 10. All right, number 9, Brian, what do we got?
Dune. Denis Villeneuve's Dune.
Nice.
And this one, I was kind of torn on. I understand this is going to be at the top of many people's lists, and maybe I'll get flack for putting it lower and even considering not putting it on my list at all, because in my mind it is effectively half a movie. But what half of a movie it is. It was so engrossing. The imagery was just mind-boggling, but I had no real anchor to the source material, so it was all coming in pretty fresh. And when I get to read about it more and actually going through the book, I'm about halfway done now. It just adds more to the movie. And I just love seeing these characters on screen here. And I think it was the hype for the film was maybe putting a little too much expectation on it. And that's another reason I was kind of reluctant, because the hype was there. I watch it and I can't help but feeling a little let down. But I know 100% I'm going to watch this not once or twice, but like 3 or 4 more times over the next few years, especially when part 2 comes out, when I think we could really evaluate it here. Denis Villeneuve, sci-fi. I mean, give me a break. Like, it has to be on my list, right? Super fascinating world. Yeah, just incredible.
Yeah, I don't want to say too much more about it because it's on my list as well at a different spot.
Well,
so we're going to touch base on it again later.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. Do you want to talk about your number 9 now?
Yeah, number 9, probably I would say my most controversial pick on this list. I wasn't a huge fan of most of the superhero movies that came out this year, but there was one movie that really, I think, left its mark on the genre and left its mark on the history of film that very few movies actually do. Ooh. And I had to put this on here. It's got to be Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Listen, I know that Zack Snyder is an acquired taste. Just so happens that I love Zack Snyder's work. It's not for everybody, but if you look at the journey it took for Zack Snyder and the rest of the cast and crew to realize this vision, if you look at this, such a unique point in cinema history where you essentially have two versions of the exact same film by two different directors put out, it's like it's going to be very unlikely that that's ever going to happen again. So just to have this cinematic experiment, unintentional cinematic experiment, but then to have Zack Snyder, like just the movement behind the story behind Zack Snyder having to leave the movie originally or having to be kind of forced out and the rewrites, and the story behind the restore the Snyder cuts movements, the fan movement and the pressure on Warner Brothers to finish this cut. And then for this actual cut to be this 4-hour magnum opus that ended up being actually really, really good and a lot better than the original Justice League cuts. I mean, it could have been a complete and utter disaster, but it wound up being not just this touchstone in cinema history, but also ended up being a really good movie. And it kind of, tied up, I think, for the most part, kind of tied up Zack Snyder's tenure in the DCEU pretty nicely. Didn't get to realize his full vision, I don't think. I think he had mapped out more movies, tying things together. But this way, he kind of was able to kind of go back and at least get some kind of closure on this. And just in terms of doing things differently, a little bit differently, I think the Marvel machine has kind of taken over and dominated the superhero space in recent years. So to get something a bit different, even if it's darker in tone, it's a bit less quippy and less maybe less fun. I will say that. Yeah. But just to have I'm glad that it's out there and having this impact and having this just a different entry into this genre and keeping things kind of more diverse in that way. And it was just always touching to see also all the support thrown behind all the actors. I think Jason Momoa and Ben Affleck, everybody was like behind Zack Snyder 100% on this. And it's like, that's really rare, I think, where you get that kind of camaraderie and solidarity and stories like that coming out of Hollywood. So even the behind the scenes was kind of touching on this, but like, I think for the cultural impact it had, I had to put Zack Snyder's Justice League on that list. So that's my number 9 pick.
Without a doubt. And honestly, I struggled with this movie in even considering it a 2021 film. Yeah. Because the original Justice League came out, I think, many years ago. It might have been 2016 or something. And this one really is a completely different film. And it is so through and through Zack Snyder, and it's his vision. And it was an amazing set of circumstances that it was even released and created. It was really a phenomenal film. I don't think I rated it as highly, and I think I was kind of hesitant to really let myself enjoy the movie. But for a 4-hour film, like a 4-hour runtime, I was into this movie from start to finish. And there was nothing really negative that I could put against the film. I think in over the years, watching this, when like I like to run through the MCU, the DCU, run through the whole series. It's like, this is the version of Justice League that I'm going to put on. I'm going to revisit that movie many times. I think it's just going to climb up and start. It's kind of like Man of Steel for me when I first watched that. It really didn't hit immediately, and I think Justice League was the same thing. because they are a little bit different, they upend your expectations for what a normal superhero movie is, and normal in this current climate is sort of your standard MCU film. It can take a little bit to process. I'm glad you threw that on there.
Yes,
It was a good pick.
And it was. You're right. It's technically a 2021 release. I know it was actually filmed much earlier than that, and so that was the one liberty I took with the release dates. I think everything else pretty much lines up with 2021.
Well, no, I think it's legit because this isn't like just listed as an alternative cut, on IMDb. Like, it is its own entry. It is a 2021 film because this movie proves that a movie is made in the editing room, right?
Yeah.
And I know they did come back and refilm a couple things for it, redo some of the special effects, but that's mostly editing and effects work to make it a whole new movie. I think it deserves to stand on. So
yeah. So my number 9 was Zack Snyder's Justice League. All right. What's your number 8 there, Brian?
My number 8 is continuing the superhero thing.
Oh.
And again, this goes back to where I don't want to put too many superhero movies on my list. And this one was kind of a difficult decision because we had 3, I thought, quite excellent superhero movies, not least of which was your previous entry of Zack Snyder's Justice League. We also had The Suicide Squad by James Gunn. But my pick for number 8 is Spider-Man No Way Home.
Oh, no.
And again,
don't spoil it for me. I haven't seen this one yet.
I don't know how much you know about the movie, and I'm trying to keep it as
more than I probably
generic as possible. But I felt crazy for throwing this movie on this list, but I really loved watching it, and I had a really good time with it. There's absolutely no doubt I'll be watching this again. It'll be added to my physical movie collection. I know there were issues with the movie, and I don't try and pretend that it wasn't without problem. And I do feel like Spider-Man has this place in my heart, not only the Spider-Man movies, but Spider-Man the character. Like, growing up with Spider-Man, my favorite superhero, really.
Okay.
These movies will always have a place in my heart, and I think that elevates this one in. But I just had a ton of fun with this movie, and I kind of like how it turned out, and I'm not going to say much more about it. Like, comparing this to Suicide Squad, my issue with Suicide Squad is there were some sections that did not really work for me. They really felt like they were thrown in there just for the sake of being thrown in, like almost not necessarily padding the runtime. I know, right?
Agree to disagree, sir.
I know. And I don't know if I have a problem with like these super violent superhero movies where it's like, are we just loving this movie because it's showing people blowing up and all this stuff? But it seems like a current trend. I mean, you have The Boys on Amazon, you have, these R-rated superhero movies, Deadpool, all this other stuff. I'm there for them. I'm enjoying them. But I think because this is Spider-Man and it just plays more to my interests specifically, it takes the edge and ends up at my number 8.
No, I was going to say, I'm not surprised about this pick for you. I know that Spider-Man is would it be fair to say he's your favorite superhero?
Yeah, easily. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I always remember how pumped you were back when the original Raimi trilogy came out and all those movies.
Yeah.
So I was like, I gotta say, I'm not surprised to see this on your list.
Yeah. And I think, what's his face there? Why am I drawing a blank on who? Tom Holland. And I think that Tom Holland...
What's his face? The guy with the face, The
guy with the face and yeah. I think he's a really good Spider-Man. And I remember you telling me this when I first watched the first Tom Holland Spider-Man in the MCU.
Homecoming.
It was just like Homecoming. Yeah, thank you. Because I was drawing a blank on that one too. I didn't really like it that much. I was just like, doesn't feel like my Spider-Man, but it's like, no, this is, and you helped me understand this. This is a different interpretation of Spider-Man. And I've really come to realize that these movies don't have to be faithful to comics. They are adaptations. They are products of their medium, and they can play with your expectations and what has been established before. And I think it's kind of exciting to go into a new Spider-Man and go along for the ride, because this is an immensely popular film and it's ranked extraordinarily highly. Like, I gave this movie 4 stars, which is probably blasphemous for a lot of people based on, I think it has like a 4.5 average rating on Letterboxd. It's like this, I suspect this movie will be in the top 3 for a lot of people, but I understand what it is, but yeah. These movies are great.
Probably a nostalgia thing, but like to me, Tobey Maguire is always going to be a whole special place in my heart as like a Spider-Man on screen. But Tom Holland is like, the kid's amazing as Spider-Man. It's so
He's
weird.
a good act.
It's so weird calling people kids now because like
movies.
I'm getting to that age. It's like I call people kids, but like
Yeah.
that kid is a really good actor, and he's really. Like you look at the behind the scenes stuff where he's actually acrobatic. He's got the dance background where he can do this. He's got the movements down. He's got that shucks golly gee.
And he's got
attitude.
a great supporting cast with him. Zendaya is fantastic actress. She's great. His buddy, who I'm drawing a blank on the actor's name, but he's a really good buddy in the film. And
his Death Star building buddy. I can't remember his name, but I remember that scene in Homecoming where they're building the Lego Death Star.
And there's just a bunch of good talent in there, and I don't know.
And again, it is another Benedict Cumberbatch appearance. This guy is like he's literally everywhere.
He's everywhere. We'll have to start a count of how many times he appears in this list. Or it might be more.
Okay,
I'm surprised he wasn't in Dune.
He's probably in there somewhere.
Part 2, maybe. What's your number 8 sitting with?
Number 8. Okay, so that's probably another controversial pick because this is another filmmaker who I think you're either on board with him or you're not.
Uh-oh.
And I happen to be on board with him. My number 8 pick is Don't Look Up.
Okay.
By Adam McKay. I loved The Big Short and Vice. I love his style of storytelling, and Don't Look Up was an incredibly timely movie. Some people thought it was a little bit too on the nose with its satire and with its social commentary. But I think looking at the past couple years, I don't think it's possible to be too on the nose or with our social commentary or our satire, because just the craziness that's gone on. But you look at, it was a funny movie, but it was also strangely one of the scariest movies I've seen, just because in terms of the basic plot of the movie is there's a comet headed toward Earth. It's an extinction level event, and these scientists are trying to warn governments and trying to warn the people at large about this impending danger. The government's worried more about appearances and points in the polls. You get people who are denying that the comet even exists. And the whole Don't Look Up movement is essentially this kind of denial. I mean, you look at obviously parallels to what's going on with COVID-19 and the pandemic and the anti-vax movement. But then you look at just our kind of society in general in terms of how social media is dividing us, or can be, rather, how social media can be used to divide us, how politics can be used to divide people, and how I used to think like zombie movies were so unrealistic. Like, who would hide a bite from their friends? I was like, but now being in the pandemic for going on year 3 here is like, yeah, there's a lot of jerks out there who actually would hide. It's like zombie pandemics seem a lot more plausible now. Yeah. But like the whole social commentary of Don't Look Up. I mean, the filmmaking itself and the acting, all amazing. It was a who's who of Hollywood. It was one of those movies where everybody was in it. Obviously the main ones were Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence. They were kind of the main scientists, but you had like Cate Blanchett in there. Tyler Perry was in there. Yeah. You had who else were the big ones? Jonah Hill, who was hilarious as always. I love whenever he shows up. But just, I think Adam McKay had originally talked about it being a metaphor for the environmental crisis. And you can see that too. Change, But kind of any large scale crisis, I think you could look at Don't Look Up and the commentary it's making and the satire and the point of the satire, and you'd apply it to see like how ineffective we can become when we start to lose sight of the actual objectives. We think more about the economy or politics or whatever it is, as opposed to actually addressing the immediate needs we have of health and safety, of saving people's lives. And I think it was a very important message. It was, I'm going to agree. It was heavy-handed. It was on the nose, but like sometimes
kind of necessary.
Sometimes we need to be beaten over the head with a 2x4 to get our attention. Especially you look at the way the politics has shifted in the West. And you look at their response to the pandemic and the anti-vax movement, and some ill-conceived protests going on right now in our nation's capital. And I think this was a movie that was definitely needed.
Yeah. It was really a spectacle to be seen and kind of surreal. Like, we've seen so many movies that are like politically charged. They have commentary. Yeah. They have to say something, but I don't think I've seen a movie that was just so like bludgeon you in the face, obvious, right? And you absolutely nailed it there. It's like, this is kind of what our culture needs. Like, there's no room for subtleties anymore. It's like there's nothing subtle about this movie. And it was a smartly written. There's good dialogue in here. There's a lot of good things happening. For me, it didn't really hit as important as the other ones. I think mainly because I'm probably not going to revisit it later on. I think it runs about like 2.5 hours, and it's just like I'm on board with the message of what the movie's trying to say, but it didn't necessarily hit for me as much as it did for you there.
No, that's fair. But again, I'm also a huge fan of Adam McKay, and
like I'll probably go back and watch his movie Vice again. I thought that was probably a better film, but it is what it is.
Yeah. But number 8 for me was Don't Look Up. What's your number 7?
Number 7 is The Tragedy of MacBeth.
Okay, I haven't seen this one yet, so I'm kind of curious.
Yeah. And I shouldn't have to worry about spoiling it because it's Macbeth, right?
I am an English major, so I think we're pretty good that way.
Yeah. And listen, I don't know about Shakespeare. I'm not well versed on all of his works, but Macbeth always stood out to me because we studied it in high school, right?
Yeah.
And I think this might be really specific, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's like, I love the structure. It's like multiple people being told their own prophecies, like their own future, right? Which compel them to take action that they wouldn't normally even consider. And classically, like, the tragedy is that they are the makers of their own undoing, right? Their prophecies are fulfilled exactly as told, but, they're suffering the negative consequence of it. In this, Joel Cohen, he's working alone, like one of his first projects, not with his brother, I think gives like a unique perspective on the story in terms of the camera work, the cinematography, like all this stuff. And to be fair, like I'll preface this, I haven't really watched any other Macbeth adaptations, but this one,
really?
I mean, it's filmed in this stark black and white. The whole thing is done on sets, and it kind of reminded me of like 300, 15 years ago was like 100% set work. But this one is also that stark black and white, super minimalist, but the camera angles are really interesting and really fetching. The atmosphere is fantastic, and the acting. I mean, Denzel Washington, Frances McDormand, I mean, these actors are at the top of their game. And I think, I love Coen brother movies. I think he was able to get in some of that Coen brothers humor into the movie here, not necessarily like through the dialogue, but definitely in the delivery and like the acting. It's just kind of like, you can see it in their eyes, right? While I'm watching this movie, I get lost at points because it is in that Shakespearean dialect. And I think that makes it a more difficult film to get into, but I can appreciate that. I want to struggle with a movie. I don't need to have everything laid out for me, but I take no regret just having my phone open with like Wikipedia, not necessarily looking at the original dialogue or play of Macbeth, but like, tell me what's going on in this movie. Remind me who these characters are, their names. I'm getting lost here and there, but I think it gets enhanced because of that. The whole thing, like even having like the Wikipedia article open, really brought me back to that high school class. Like the whole class would take turns reading lines for like a half hour, and all of us had our Cole's notes open with the play and liner notes on like, oh, this is happening here. This bit of dialogue, like this, like this means something else here. And it's like, I'm picking up on all that stuff in this movie. I just thought it was really, really neat. Definitely a very late entry in 2021.
Yeah.
Released straight to streaming, and it took me by surprise. I was really into it.
Wait, are you just putting out movies that you just watched in the past week?
It feels that way, right? It feels that way. There's definitely something to be said for like that recency bias, which is probably why a lot of these top tier movies get released later in the year for the awards. But
no, I'm really looking forward to that as a fan of Shakespeare in general. but also the Coen brothers, obviously. And I can see some of the darker aspects of the story actually fall in line with their sensibilities in terms of creating kind of maybe more darkly humorous moments. And I'm really interested to see what they do, or what rather Joel Coen does with that source material. So that's definitely on my list.
It's interesting too, because they've worked together for so much. I'm not sure if Ethan Coen is like kind of retired from the industry, but for Joel to break out on his own and still put together like this project is really neat. And I love that. I think it probably has a lot of his own personal style attributed to the film. Like this, he has a lot to say. And for what I've been reading, it was an important movie for him to release, for him to get into. Nice. What's your number 7?
Number 7, I know you're going to have something to say about this.
Uh-oh.
This is definitely unexpected for me to have this movie on my list, given my past experiences and my past evaluations of this director's work. But number 7 for me is The French Dispatch.
Okay. Interesting.
And the reason I preface it like that is because, Brian, as you're well aware, I've not necessarily been a fan of Wes Anderson's work.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it didn't click with me before, I think, except for Bottle Rocket. Is it Bottle Rocket or Bottle Rockets?
Bottle Rocket is their first film. Okay. Sorry, his first film.
For some reason, I always want to put an S on the end. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But I love that movie, but I couldn't get into the other ones, like the Royal Tenenbaums. I remember for some reason, it didn't click with me. The Life Aquatic didn't click with me that much. I kind of put aside Wes Anderson films, didn't pay much attention. It didn't really work for me. But I've been going through, I heard a lot of good reviews about The French Dispatch. I've been actually going through, like, one of my watching projects has been to watch specifically movies about journalism and journalists. And this kind of fell into that category as well. So I was like, what the heck? I'll throw it on. And, honestly, I had a great time watching this film. The way it was structured with these interwoven stories. I'm sure you're aware, as well as anyone who's watched Wes Anderson's films are aware, it's highly stylized storytelling.
Yeah.
Very, very distinctive kind of shot composition. Like, you look at the symmetry in the shots was something that stood out to me. Just like the quirkiness of the characters. I think the term that best, or the adjective that can most be ascribed to Wes Anderson's work is whimsical. And this film was not lacking in whimsy. And then just hitting on the themes of the idea of, legacy, hitting on the themes of, at what degree is a journalist a part of the story? You look at that one section with Frances McDormand, and she's essentially helping to write the manifesto of this youth movement who's rebelling, and she's actually ends up having a relationship with the leader, and like really interesting questions. And then there was the one section with Jeffrey Wright. People probably know him a lot from Westworld. He's going to be Commissioner Gordon in the Batman. But
it's incredible.
Oh my God. Just listening to him narrate stuff. I think he's like the new Morgan Freeman. Just like his voice, I could listen to him for hours just telling that story, and just the way the story was told. Listen, I'm a late to the game. I'm a convert to Wes Anderson. I'm going to have to go back, I think, and look at some of his films and reevaluate them. But just it was a nice, charming film. It was an uplifting film. And it was kind of, I guess, what I needed at the time, where, like dealing with all the stuff going on in the world today. And The French Dispatch was just like this incredible breath of fresh air, amazingly well told story. I love the way it was structured. And again, like one of those who's who of Hollywood. We got obviously the main Wes Anderson kind of players. Adrian Brody, is always nice to see him back doing stuff again. Bill Murray, Frances McDormand, Owen Wilson was in there, of course. And then you got Benicio del Toro. Just all kinds of great. And then I keep coming back to Jeffrey Wright and just his that narration and the
narration is hypnotic.
Yeah, like I couldn't get enough of that. I wanted to go back and rewatch the whole movie, but like that section again, and like that whole food section was just, and it was so crazy because they're all structured as like there's supposed to be like articles in this issue of the magazine. It's supposed to be like, it was like the food section, but it was a big crime story where like the commissioner's kid was kidnapped, and the chef goes in and saves the day. And it was like completely bizarre stuff. Leah Seydoux, I don't know how to, she's a French actor. She's in the latest James Bond flick. She was in there. I got to give props to her as well. She's just maybe somebody people who don't watch maybe a lot of foreign films might not have seen her. She's also in Blue is the Warmest Color. But it was great to get like different actors in there. And I always love seeing actors that I've seen and I'm fans of from the films that are a little bit off the beaten path. And when they get a bit more recognition, I always like to see that. But yeah, overall, The French Dispatch kind of, listen, I had to put aside some biases, but Wes Anderson, it took years and years, but he finally won me over.
He's finally broken through.
He broke through that
barrier of yours. I'm impressed. Like, so, and this is like, it is essentially 3 kind of like short Wes Anderson films, which I find fascinating.
Yeah.
How would you rank the 3 films? Like, how would you put them in order of your preference?
Right. Okay. So there was, let's see, there was the food one, there was the student revolution, and then there was the art exhibit one, right?
Yeah.
This is tough. I think I would go food, art exhibit, revolution. But honestly,
it's fair.
You could convince me on any given day probably to put them in any order, because they were mesmerizing watching them. I didn't want the sections to end, honestly. When the sections were coming down, I knew it was coming to the end of that. It's like, but I want to spend more time with these characters. I want to know what happens next, kind of thing, right?
Well, I can't help but think maybe some of these are like leftover, attempts at different screenplays of full-length movies, and it's like maybe they don't work as a full movie, and they work great as a short film.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it earlier there, saying this is the kind of film, like the kind of a whimsical, feel-good film that we need, because it's full of all these little quirks and things that they're just happy.
Well, I think all the segments and the story itself were kind of bittersweet, because it was all about these reporters, like it was about the death of the person who ran the newspaper. And essentially the newspaper was shutting down because in his will, he wanted all like the machines melted down and everything. And all the stories themselves were kind of bittersweet, but there was something that left just like a positive effect afterwards. Whereas like, I felt better, and the world seemed a little bit brighter after watching this movie. So I appreciated that.
Well, I think we all look forward to hearing about your Wes Anderson rewatch. I'm sure you'll do a marathon of sorts. I look forward to hearing about it.
All right. What's number 6?
Number 6 for me is a film you talked about earlier, The Last Duel.
Oh.
This movie really did like sit with me.
Yeah.
I couldn't get over how the movie was structured in 3 different character perspectives. I thought that was really interesting and really stood out. It touches on a whole bunch of really good points, which you talked about earlier. I think as I said before, it's a really important film to watch. And I think I watched this movie. We recorded an episode about it the next day, and the day after that, I went out and bought it on disc. It's just like, this is 1, 2, 3 done. This is going to be revisited. This was a really incredible film here, and I think it gets elevated after our discussion on it. There's a lot of good things happening here. There's a lot of really interesting work going on, and it blew my mind, like how relevant it was in today's culture, like especially like in the Me Too movement and awareness of all these issues, the historical insight into where our culture was hundreds of years ago and how far we've come, but also how much further we need to go. Mm-hmm. It's just crazy to me. And I mean, we talked about that last scene. That last scene was incredible.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Like these Ridley Scott films that feature multiple giant battle scenes like Gladiator, probably Robin Hood, all these other movies he's done over the years, hundreds of extras, lots of armies battling one another. We skip those battles in this movie and we focus on that 1 versus 1 duel with all the stakes. And I felt like it paid off in such a different way that I could appreciate more. And I think the movie, it was kind of almost like mismarketed because it's advertised as one of those classic Ridley Scott films, like one of those action films. And when you go in, you're getting something completely different. And I could see that leaving a bad taste in people's mouths. It's just like, don't look up. You're going to watch that kind of knowing you're getting into some social commentary here. And this is the same thing. And I think it probably took a lot of people off guard, but you got to embrace it. You got to watch this movie. I was 100% invested in it from start to finish. It was just really fantastic.
Yeah. No argument for me. It's on my top 10 list. So, and I think we talked about this in a full length podcast episode and before. So like, I don't have anything I feel I need to add.
That's absolutely fair. What's your number 6?
All right. Number 6, for me is Censor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So I really appreciated, I think you're a huge fan. You're more kind of deeply embedded in the horror side of things, in the horror scene. And I think I look to you to kind of give me some guidance of like kind of new horror movies to watch and some different things. Censor was a movie. I don't know if I would have sought this out on my own. I think you recommended this to me and we did an episode about this, but I think it was a first time director as well. It was a movie it was a movie about movies. It was but it was a movie dissecting horror films and also a great horror film in its own rights. Some amazing performances. The way it was shot, like it stuck with me for days afterwards. Just the settings, the actual, like, was it Don't Go in the Church, I think was the name of the horror movie within the horror movie. And even that was like, everything about it was just like slightly unsettling, slightly disturbing. I love the way it played with perspective. And I'm always a fan of movies that examine maybe like more like the psychological thriller component and like kind of looking at somebody's breakdown, and like films that question reality and looking at through the eyes of a very unreliable narrator and seeing like, oh, what was this? Was this actually real? Did that actually happen? The whole thing was just utterly engaging. If you're a fan of, film, if you're a fan of horror films, if you're a fan of, probably if you actually lived through that moral
the video
panic
nasties era,
the video nasties, moral panic era, probably hits home again. But I mean, the parallels to modern movements against, railing against negative influence of video games or movies and how it's just, corrupting the youth. That theme's always going to be relevant to some degree. But yeah, Censor really, really surprised me in all the best ways possible. And I was genuinely unsettled watching the movie, and then it was one of the movies like I had to go and run and turn the lights on right away. I couldn't sit there in the dark. I was like, I needed to think about it, but not in the dark.
That was. I'm glad it made your top 10 list. I was a massive fan of this movie. I have a lot more to say about it a little later on. Hopefully that's not a
spoiler alert.
It becomes a matter of what place does Censor take on my part of the list, but I'm glad it made yours. It was a really, really interesting film. And like you said, it was like Prano Bailey Bond's directorial, like feature film debut. Really incredible stuff.
I gotta give a shout out to the actor here. What was her name?
So it was Niam something.
Oh yeah, Niam Algar. I'm probably saying that completely wrong, but she's one of those actors. Like, I got my eye out for more of her work now. She was also in Wrath of Man, which we checked out last year as well. But I'm really excited to see what else she can do. And of course, the director. Like, that was the first feature length film, I think. I think they've done some work earlier, but like as a feature length debut, to have Censor as your debut film, like filmmakers would kill to have that as their debut film. It's just amazing flick.
I wonder if there's a trend here where a lot of the movies we talked about on the podcast are elevated into this top 10, right?
There's probably a reason we're talking about them to begin with, I guess. Not coincidence. Okay, what's your number? Your number 6?
My number 5.
5. We're on 5. Okay, what do you got for 5? We're the top half here.
Pig.
Ooh.
And speaking of directorial, like feature film debuts, and when we say this, like these directors have done other work. There's just, when you go look them on IMDb, it's like they have a couple short films. They've probably done some stage work. Who knows? Feature film debut from Michael Sarnowski. This movie blew me away. Yep. And I feel bad right now even talking about it in the sense that this is number 5. It should be higher. I don't know.
Well, I'm really curious about your top 4 now.
Me too. I forget. So this is, another film completely upended my expectations. And this might be a trend for me. Like if a movie really goes above and beyond and it's just, it sticks out. But I think this one really completely took everyone by surprise. Initially, if you watch the advertising for this, any of the trailers, it looked like we were getting a Nick Cage copycat film of John Wick.
Yeah.
Where instead of a dog being murdered that sends Nick Cage out, we get a pig being taken, right? And so you kind of go in knowing what the formula is going to be. And listen, Nick Cage, look at his film career. He's done some real stinkers, some real good work. He's done all sorts of interesting things. But whenever he turns up, you don't know what kind of Nick Cage you're going to get. And this Nick Cage movie is not what you expect it to be. We get something different, and it's vastly improved over that typical revenge film. And I'm not trying to knock John Wick here. That's a great, fun action movie, but this
Absolutely.
is not a John Wick film. This is elevated beyond that type of film, I think. It's like Cage and his business party, and we've also talked about this in length on a podcast episode. Like they go on a journey of like acceptance, self-discovery. There's this great commentary on like that life is short, embrace the things you love. They don't come around that often. Like you got to put value on those things, on those rare things, and really like identify what is important to you. I think Nick Cage, he deserves some nominations for this performance. He's out of this world. Michael Sarnowski directing this. He wrote it along with Vanessa Block, who I looked up. She also has no other feature film stuff. So it's like, I got to keep an eye on this writer. I got to keep an eye on this director. It was just absolutely mind-boggling good. I have nothing else to say about it. I mean, obviously we have a full podcast episode. I think you like this movie as well. I suspect it's going to be on your top 10.
Yeah. I don't want to say too much because I'm probably going to dive into this
absolutely
a
fair.
bit later.
That's fair. So I think we should move on to your number 5.
My number 5. So my number 5 is one I didn't expect to have this on here, actually. This one, again, took me by surprise, but really blew me away. And it's The Green Knight.
Yeah.
Watching this film, to be fair, this might have been higher, but when I watched this, I was I had just taken some edibles, and so I still haven't watched this completely sober
legally
yet.
where we live.
Completely
right?
We're in Canada, so it's all we're talking about marijuana. It's all legal here. So I wasn't able to maybe dive as deep as I maybe want to. I'm going to go back and watch this again soon.
Fair.
But watching this movie, first of all, just in terms of like, oh my God, what a beautifully shot movie. Like literally,
Insane.
You could take any frame from that movie, take it out, blow it up to poster size and hang it on your wall. It would be a piece of art. Like it was just amazing, so amazingly well shot. The actual performances from the actors, obviously, all amazing. Yeah, Dev Patel. You had Alicia Vikander, who played 2 roles, not just one, but 2 roles.
Which was wild. I didn't even realize at first it was the same actress in that different role. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Amazing.
I had to go back and look that up. You had Uncle Owen himself, Joel Edgerton, bunch of people. You had Erin Kellyman, who you might recognize from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and or Enfys. She was Enfys Nest in Solo.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, yeah, great performances, incredibly well shot. I love that it was thematically very, very different from any other movie on this list or any movie that I've seen recently, where it was dealing a lot with a sense of honor and this difference between, I think they talk about it in the movie, between being a great man and between being a good man, right? And what does that mean to, like, again, I'm always obsessed with questions of legacy and identity and, like the path not followed. But yeah, that idea of like, what does it mean to be honorable, right? What does that mean to be an honorable person? Like the questioning ideals of loyalty and trust and all these things, essentially kind of deconstructing the chivalric code, kind of this ancient code of honor. And then looking at that in that kind of older code of honor, the chivalric code, in a modern or postmodern light, and taking that down. Yeah, it was just, and the special effects. I mean, the Green Knight himself was super creepy.
It was
like,
really
there were some genuinely like scary moments to this, but just like the feel of it, you felt like it was a bit gritty, or you felt like you were in medieval times watching it. You had to like almost like wipe the grime off you watch this, which is what I want from a medieval movie. I want to feel like I'm in there. I don't want it to be sanitized and too clean. But yeah, overall, the Green Knight was just, it was one of those things. It was something very, very special, I think. And that's a movie, I think, like in terms of your criteria, Brian, it's a movie that I'm going to go back to again and again to rewatch this. Because I think rewatching it, because I think reading up other people's interpretations afterwards and what other people noticed, there's just so many things going on and so many different layers in terms of the way that Sir Gawain?
Yep.
Sir Gawain, played by Dev Patel, the main character, and how he was being tested and how he was kind of failing those tests. And then, it was just a great film. I highly recommend it to everybody who hasn't seen it yet. Yeah.
The only thing I'll add to this right now is going back to one of your first points, how beautiful this movie is.
Oh my goodness.
And like watching this in 4K, like Ultra HD, wow. Like it really takes you back for presumably a movie that I didn't think had a ton of budget. Like they really made it go far. Like this is an A24 production.
Yeah.
David Lowery's the director. I can't remember what other movies he's done off the top of my head, but wow, the cinematography, again, someone else probably assisted with this, but he also wrote the movie. Just top to bottom, every frame of painting, obviously. Really incredible.
Green Knight is my number 5. What do you got for number 4, Brian?
Number 4 might be a bit controversial, but hopefully breaks that streak of movies that I just watched recently, and in the past couple months here. And again, might be controversial because it had a very, very limited release at the end of 2020. Is The Father, starring Anthony Hopkins and Olivia Colman.
Nice.
This movie did stick with me. I think we mentioned it briefly on an episode of one of the recent Reels podcast episodes we did. And I was kind of hesitant to put it on my list, and I was even more confused on like where to put it on my list.
Yep.
And this is definitely a case in point where this list is dynamic. Like I could put The Father and Pig number 4 and 5 in alternate spots and be just as happy with either one. This is a movie that really stood out to me because the acting was so incredible. And this is the thing, and I've said it many times before, and I'll keep saying it. I don't know what good acting, bad acting looks like, right? Like I watch trash tier films and get a lot of enjoyment out of them. But this movie is one of those cases where I'm watching the acting and it's like, wow, Anthony Hopkins is at the top of his game, and he deserves every award, every accolade that comes his way for this. Olivia Colman is also an incredible actress, and she was doing a great job here as well. The way the film was shot, like how is sort of like the set, like he's kind of like in his house the whole time, and the set has subtle changes. There's significant changes. It's very disorienting to watch, and it tries and I think successfully conveys like the horrors of these mind-altering diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's, and what people who suffer from those go through. It's incredibly emotional, and especially at the end of the movie, like you have the emotional gamut. Like you watch this guy be rude to people, you watch him flirt and joke around with people, you see him care for people, and then you see him suffer himself through no fault of his own. Like it's that humor and the tragedy that goes on. It was just so significant. This one really stuck with me, and I think it will be difficult to rewatch it as part of my criteria.
Yeah.
But I think I owe it to myself to revisit this movie again.
Yeah, I mean, watching The Father is a huge gut punch, emotionally speaking. Even if you've never had to go through that, dealing with, a family member who's suffering from any kind of dementia or Alzheimer's or any kind of terrible condition like that. I have not had to go through that at all. But just looking at this performance and just like the pathos coming through from Anthony Hopkins' character, where you're looking at things from his point of view and getting really a sense of like how disorienting it must be and how horrifying it must be to lose that sense of place, to lose that sense of time, to lose that sense of self, and how horrible and how difficult it is going through that personally, and how difficult it is for family members going through that. Like it's an incredible look at a difficult subject, but like you're saying, shot incredibly well. Anthony Hopkins, I mean, obviously he's one of the great actors of all time, and he gives I think I would
he
agree.
shows up here.
It was a career best performance, right?
Yeah.
And you really got that sense of pathos and that emotion coming from him, and that running the gamut from the humorous to the anger to the fear and the paranoia, and it was a heck of a watch.
Your number 4, please.
Completely different tone after that somber entry for number 4 for you.
I as I recall, it was the same thing in our podcast episode. I talked about it. It was just like, oh, this is, maybe we should take a break from this, but yes.
The other end of the spectrum, number 4 for me was Matrix Resurrections.
Oh, very good. Very good.
For me, I was one of those people. I grew up, obviously, you and I, Brian, it was in our lifetime where The Matrix came out, blew our minds, changed filmmaking forever. The other 2 movies came out, the sequels, Reloaded and then Revolutions. And I think I appreciate that trilogy more today than I did necessarily when it came out, especially the second 2 movies weren't quite as well received. They were financially successful, but I think people didn't really buy into them the same way that or weren't really inspired the same way that the first one inspired people. But watching those movies again, listen, it's another one of those things, like you're either on board or you're not. Like, I bought the ticket for The Matrix. I'm on board for this ride. So Resurrections to me felt like, despite my reservations, the marketing campaign, the trailers sold me. And then when I watched the movie, I was like, yes, like Lana Wachowski still has something interesting to say, something important to say. And it feels like, to me, the real Matrix trilogy now is like The Matrix, and then Reloaded and Revolutions feel like one complete movie together. And then Resurrections feels like the ending of this trilogy to me. It feels like a story that I wouldn't argue that any art is necessary, but it feels like, in terms of the story of The Matrix, it felt like a story that was needed to be told, fit in well with the overarching story of The Matrix, and was also very timely in terms of updating some of the themes of The Matrix to address some of the social and political things that are going on today. I know that from Lana Wachowski's point of view, that The Matrix was always partially a metaphor for the trans experience, and I think that LGBTQ perspective is a lot more evident in Matrix Resurrections, to its benefit, having those themes kind of more clearly shine through, with a little bit less studio interference in diluting those themes a bit more. But if you look at the social commentary in terms of how we're so divided today in terms of on the political spectrum, and kind of that fake news and stoking that outrage, and again, like questioning reality. And I think out of all the Matrix movies, Matrix Resurrections was the one where, like, the first third of the movie, it was really had me questioning, like, what was going on, like what was real and what wasn't, and going back to that theme of, like, those deep philosophical themes that run through the entire Matrix saga of of agency and choice, of freedom, of reality, of identity, like discovering who we are and what's real and what's not, and how much do we have agency over our own lives, and does it matter about the choices we make, or does it matter more about embracing those choices and the reasons that we're making them? Really deep philosophical questions inside a great action movie. It's probably also the most lighthearted and humorous of the Matrix movies, and probably one of the most uplifting, with this essentially Neo and Trinity, this love story kind of culminating, and essentially love is what wins the day at the end. It wasn't the violence. It wasn't the fact that I could punch harder than you. It was that these two people loved each other so much, and that love was what changed the world. And I think that's a very powerful message. I think that's the one that's needed today. It's needed in any day, of course, but I think especially today when you look at some of the conflicts going on, that very powerful message of the simple act of choosing love over violence. I think that's a super powerful message. I think that hit home. But overall, for being a 20-year later sequel that worked really, really well, for being a postmodern movie that was able to deconstruct itself and deconstruct the series it was in. So it's a very, very meta film. If you don't like meta commentary, you're probably not going to like this. It shouldn't have worked. This movie shouldn't have been as good as it was. All signs were pointing to it. Like Warner Brothers was going to make a movie with or without the Wachowskis' involvement, and all signs pointed to being a complete and utter failure. And I love the heck out of this movie.
I think you nailed it there. It was really mind blowing. It was such a good film. And for me, it didn't make my top 10, but it could have easily been in there. I went in probably with a lot of people in the same boat with kind of a different level of expectation and getting something that I was not entirely prepared to see and process at the time. Yep. And I realized that I need to see this movie again. And I think this movie is just going to get better with age. I think it has a lot of really interesting things to say. Lana Wachowski did a tremendous job of, like you said, making a movie that by all rights should have been absolutely trash, because it's kind of like, it felt like a forced entry in this franchise. But she made a bunch of really excellent commentary and a different feel to the movie that should endure for quite a long time. And especially like that first half hour, 45 minutes or so, when we don't know exactly what's happened in the story. We don't know, is Neo in the Matrix? Is he not? The characters are super confused. Like, that was represented on screen so well. Yeah. Like that reality bending experience of just like, where is your mind? It was so interesting. I look forward to seeing that again. Yeah, it's a good entry for your.
So that was Matrix Resurrection is number 4 for me. All right, we're getting like down to the nitty gritty here. We're getting your top 3 here, Brian. So what's number 3 on your list here?
These are significant films, I think, and my number 3 is The Night House, starring Rebecca
Hall.
Starring Rebecca Hall. I was going to say Rebecca Ferguson. I was thinking about Dune in my mind.
Yeah, well, like this is the year of the Rebeccas, man. Rebecca Ferguson and Rebecca Hall are just like, yeah, amazing.
They're representing.
Yeah.
So starring Rebecca Hall and directed by David Bruckner. I think you introduced me, like you recommended this movie, and this one blew me away. Like I had no idea this movie was coming out. It seemed to come out of left field for me. I was just left at the end of the movie with my mouth wide open and all. I had no idea what I'd even just witnessed, and then like processing it afterward was really exciting to think about. And when we talked about it, you really brought forward how this movie works on multiple levels based on your perspective and what you get out of it. I think you might have quoted the director in how he intentionally designed the film was sort of two sides of a coin. And whatever side you consider to be like more scary is what you sort of see, what you kind of get out of the movie. And then you realize there's another side of the coin there. And it's also incredibly terrifying. Like, I don't want to go into details of the plot or anything. It's just something that you need to see. Rebecca Hall, I'm always going to show up for this woman. She's one of my favorite actresses. She's in all sorts of interesting films, and especially some of these kind of lower mid-tier budget horror films. I think she does a really good job of carrying the movie. Like, she's the lead. She has a great supporting cast here too. David Bruckner, I loved his film. I think it was 2018, The Ritual. I definitely recommend checking that out. Yeah, definitely check that out. I'm really excited to see what comes next. And I don't even know what to say. I mean, we have a full episode on it. We have all sorts of things to say about it. This one really stood out. Again, this is another one where I think it came out on Blu-ray and I was basically buying it as soon as possible. I don't want to miss this one from on physical media. Really, really good.
Yeah, I'm gonna save my comments for a couple minutes from now.
All right.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler. Oh man. So what is your number 3?
So my number 3 is actually one you've already mentioned.
Uh-oh.
And it is Dune.
Dune. Quite high up there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It wasn't originally going to be that high up. But then going back and ruminating on it, I'm a recent convert to the books. I just started reading them a couple of years ago. I'm into the series. I think the 3rd or 4th book into the series right now. I was immediately a fan of the books. I didn't think I was going to be. I was always like, oh, well, how could I, like, they're so hyped up. How could they possibly live up to the expectations? They can. They absolutely can. And so, like, I think I specifically started reading Dune because I heard that Denis Villeneuve was going to make an adaptation of it. He's one of my favorite directors working today. And then in the sci-fi space, he did Blade Runner. Why did I say it like that? He did Blade Runner 2049. He did Arrival. He's Denis Villeneuve, and science fiction, just he does them so well. And Dune is one of the most faithful adaptations of a book that I think I've seen. But just in terms of this, like, just the raw craft of filmmaking, just the way that shots are composed, like from action scenes to just 2 characters staring at the desert. Every single shot is just so compelling, taking, such complex stories and themes and effectively distilling them down and throwing it up on the screen. Like it's so complex. It's a feat unto itself that he was even able to translate this from the written word onto the screen with the help, of course, of talented, set designers and the special effects artists and the actors. The cast was stacked. Obviously, Timothy.
Right. It's almost unfair how well it was stacked.
Again, Rebecca Ferguson, who I never really paid attention to before, but like really incredible. She blew me away. I'm on the lookout for her work now going forward. Of course, you got like Thanos in there. Josh Brolin.
Got Oscar Isaac
again with his glorious beard. It was amazing. And performance, of course, but like the beard. Everything about this movie, the more I thought about it, it's not my favorite film. I think, like you said, once part 2 comes out, because the first Dune book is so expansive and covers so much ground, they had to split it into 2 movies, and the second one is getting made. I think it's in pre-production right now, or production, some phase of production right now. Like you said, it feels like it kind of is not a complete story, and so I think that's the only thing really that kept me from having this even higher on this list. It's number 3 on my list. Could have been a number 1 if is it Warner Brothers again? If Warner Brothers is just like, let him make his 4-hour opus adaptation of this could have been a number 1 film for me. As it is, it's a top 3 film. It's an incredible story, incredibly told. That I think it's one of those movies where you think about not just the performances, about like, oh, I can't imagine another actor in that role. But it's also in terms of the director. I can't imagine another director directing this film and directing it this well and getting this vision across. And it's just like the epic scale of the themes and the conflict and the setting and the characters was captured. So I felt like I was literally transported to another world with this movie, which is so rare these days. I think very few filmmakers, I think Christopher Nolan and Denis Villeneuve are exceptional at, really drawing you into the world and taking you on a trip where you feel like you're on an adventure with these characters. For all those reasons and probably and more that we discussed ad nauseum before, is like, I loved myself some Dune.
Absolutely incredible. And that's not even to mention that like other incredible directors have attempted adaptations of Dune in the past, like David Lynch, obviously directed 1984 version of Dune. And then Denis Villeneuve just comes in and kind of shows us all how it's done. And I think, granted, 30 years later, he has an advantage of more technology available
Yeah.
to make some of these fantastical elements come on screen. But there's a lot of things that go into making a movie, and like the music, incredible. The atmosphere, the acting, like it was almost like a magical thing that comes together, all the elements to make Dune. And I'm shocked, like you said, they don't allow him to make the 4 hour or 5 hour, however long the two parts are going to be, all at once. Like we're still waiting for them to make the second part, which is a guarantee. It's like Warner Brothers I think they kind of play with us a little bit in making us think, oh, we need to go out to see this in theaters, or else number 2 is not going to get greenlit. But no, it's like all that was kind of like fake marketing ploy. Number 2 is coming 100%, and I'm there for it.
Yeah.
Really incredible.
Yeah, but Dune is my number 3 pick. Number 2 for you, Brian. We're coming down to like, this is the creme de la creme, the best of the best of 2021.
Yeah. We're getting some repeats here on the list because you talked about The Green Knight, and Green Knight is my number 2 movie.
That high, really?
Yeah, this one blew me away. I absolutely loved watching this movie in theaters last year. It was just perfect for me. And I almost feel bad for enjoying the film as much as I did like the first time around.
Why?
Because it was hyped up for so much, and especially like social media. I'm on some film circles online, and being an A24 produced film, I think comes with a bit of preconceived, like pretentious aura around it, right? Like I think you're seeing some counterculture of just like, you know what, guys, A24 is overrated. It's not that great. But you know what? These movies, like some of these movies hit hard. They are that great. This movie absolutely delivered. And I was really hard pressed to recognize any real negative critique on it.
Yeah.
It's an adaptation of like an ancient tale, right? Like this Legend of Gawain. I'm not familiar with it. But understanding what the story is, you can see how like that ancient story has had influence on every single modern like hero movie, like hero story that we've had since then. And when you're watching this, I can feel how old and familiar that story felt. Like our hero here, like those protagonists, played brilliantly, Dev Patel as Gawain. So incredible. Like he's going through a variety of challenges, and it's like on paper it seems kind of boring. It's like we've seen this before. Challenge A, B, C, D, etc. But man, the way David Lowery directs this, he wrote the movie as well, it just elevates it to a whole other level. Our hero here, I think he changed it a little bit from obviously the source material. I think it's important. He's full of flaws, right? Like we're introduced to this character at the beginning of the movie. Like he's kind of in a brothel, like he's not taking his duties responsibly. He's a knight, or kind of like not a classic knight like all these other guys. And I think these flaws make him super relatable because he wants to impress both his uncle, who is King Arthur, and all the knights of the Round Table, right? Like he is going to be a knight almost like through his bloodline, but he doesn't have the skill. Doesn't have the attitude or like the ambition to do that, but he wants to be that person. And I think we can all kind of relate to wanting to impress family and our peers. And then he kind of reveals his true self as he goes on this journey. Well, first he makes this big mistake of accepting this challenge at the beginning of the movie, and kind of like, I think overzealously does his thing, and he has to pay the consequence in the end. But he goes on this journey where he sort of gets to be not the greatest hero, right? Like he's just stumbling through a lot of these challenges. And ultimately, I mean, I guess full spoilers ahead there, like he really comes to accept who he is, and that recognition of like who he is and his acceptance of his fate just really brought it home for me. Like it really brought the whole thing together. It was really incredible. I don't know if you have anything else to add. I mean, from when you talked about it before, but man, I'm looking forward to watching this again.
I think it hits home, right? Because his whole motivation is like, you know, he hasn't gone on his great adventure yet. He hasn't started his great story that he can share with people. And I think that kind of hits home, especially, you know, for me, I just had my 40th birthday recently. And so like those kind of things are like in your mind. Like what kind of stories can you look back on and tell? Like what's your legacy going to be? But also like you were talking about, and like I was talking about, that idea of like the difference between being a great man and a good man, right? It's like, I think that one scene where he like, it shows what could have been if he become king and he had his legacy and he had power and he had his family and his kids and his grandkids lived down, but he was not happy. He wasn't fulfilled because it was all built on lies and illusions, essentially. And this idea of doing, what other people expect you to do and what other people think is the right thing. And like that idea, that tension between, how you want people to perceive you and how you actually want to live your life and how you should live your life, and how that kind of balances out in the kind of moral decisions that we're forced to make. And that kind of thing, like we're like how you want to be perceived and how you are perceived. I think that's an important question that we all kind of have to face about, like, what does it mean to do the right thing? What does it mean to be, like the sacrifices it takes to do the right thing, right? Because like that's the whole, one of the main questions that come up, the ROI of, doing the right thing is so difficult because it does have repercussions, because you have to accept the consequences of your actions as an honorable person, as a good person. When you make mistakes, you have to accept the consequences of those mistakes, and that's not an easy thing to do, right? And so like going on that journey with him is like, it's such a relatable kind of universal journey that I think you're talking about this being kind of an archetypal story where you recognize those archetypal characters and settings and themes that are prevalent in the story we tell today. And I think that goes to the timelessness of this story and why it's so impactful.
And I was also kind of transported back to high school English class again.
Okay.
This is the second time in the list because I was thinking about it in Tragedy of MacBeth, and here we are. And I don't think it relates specifically to this movie, but it stuck with me, and I think it reminded me when I was watching this of that class and the short story we read, where essentially the lesson was like, you are who you are based on your actions. Like people see you, like yourself, based on the actions you take, not who you think you are, right? It's just like you might have all these conceived notions of who you are, but you're not that person out in the rest of the world. And I think a lot of that gets put on this guy where a lot of people see him as maybe a bit of a failure, and he needs to fulfill that quest
well, I think it goes a bit deeper, knight. Where I think it's like him projecting his own insecurities, where he's going to think that other people are going to think that he thinks that other people are going to think he's a failure because he didn't do this great thing, or because he didn't have the same kind of follow the same narrative. So like it works on so many different levels and different layers, which is why I think it is such a great story, and why it made, like, obviously your number 2, it made my top 5 as well. So like it's a great film.
I feel like we could continue talking about The Green Knight for another hour because we did not have an opportunity to record a podcast episode about it last year. So it's like we're getting all this out right now, but let's move forward into your number 2.
We're getting into repeat territory here, I think. Not a surprise. I think a lot of our tastes kind of overlap here. My number 2, a movie that absolutely blew me away, another horror film, was The Night House.
Oh, nice.
The Night House, again, like just in terms of thematically, it was dealing with it was a genuine horror film in its own right. Incredibly scary, incredibly frightening. More of on the psychological side, it was more like a psychological horror or psychological. I don't think thriller is the right word, so I'll say psychological horror. But just dealing with terms of grief, dealing with themes of grief and loss and mental illness and relationships, and how well you know people and how well you know yourself, the effects that mental illness and grief and loss can have on you, and have on the people around you, and like to deal with those themes in the way they did, to throw in like a couple kind of, it's always kind of scary throwing in those kind of supernatural elements about like the old kind of pagan rituals and things like that. Mm-hmm. There's always something kind of a little bit unsettling about that stuff, even if you don't believe in the supernatural, which I don't. all that, you throw in like pagan rituals, like Wicker Man style stuff, and there's a chill that goes down your spine.
Yeah.
Something that connected to the ancient world, to the old world, something lost in the depths of history, that you can't, it's murky and you can't quite see it. And then again, the performance by Rebecca Hall, just wow. I think she's got another film coming out called, is it Resurrection, I think, or Resurrections? It's coming out this year in 2022, where she's leading it again. Honestly, yeah, going back and looking at some of my favorite performances and some of my favorite movies of the past several years, and it's crazy how many Rebecca Hall has actually showed up in. But seeing her kind of front and center here just give me a new appreciation for her talents. And like, she's another actor. Like, I'm going back and looking at other things that she's done, and she's on my radar for movies coming out. It's just like phenomenal movie that works. Again, I think we talked about it, works on so many levels in terms of and so many different interpretations that I think the director specifically left it ambiguous. It's like, oh, this could be real, or this could be in her mind, or this could actually be a supernatural entity chasing her, or she could be making it up. And either way you go, it works on the surface level in terms of a horror movie, but thematically you start digging down deeper, and there's just there's just so much. You could rewatch this a dozen different times, and still be finding new things in there, and watching it in a dozen different ways, and finding something else that you're picking out bits and pieces here and there. Again, I think it's something that transcends the genre. I think horror is often looked at as like maybe a lesser genre, or maybe like not as prestigious as drama, which usually gets all the awards in award season. But man, The Night House was just one of those movies that just, I didn't know what to expect, but it blew me away, and it's just like one of the best films I think of the decade, let alone the year. It's a movie I'm going to definitely go back and revisit. It's going to be in my regular rotation, I think. But yeah, The Night House, my number 2 pick, just a phenomenal film. I highly recommend it to anybody out there.
It's a really good pick for the list. I'm glad you put it in there. I'm glad we got into that movie, and we had some good discussion on it before, and I think we'll continue to have some good talks about it. And I want to spread it around. I mean, it was really, really solid, and it goes a long way. I really look forward to watching that again.
Okay, now the moment we've all been waiting for. We're down to the top tier, the creme de la creme, the best of the best. So, Brian, you have one movie that you can pick from 2021 that stands out above all others. If you had to get rid of every other movie from 2021 and only keep one, this is the one you're going to keep.
There's a lot of pressure on this. There's so much. Like, I felt fine putting together this list, and then all of a sudden we're at number 1. Is like, oh my God, the immense pressure is overwhelming. But this one was really simple for me. Number 1 for my year of 2021 was Censor. I love this film.
Wow.
From top to bottom. I made a note earlier where I said, if you listen to our previous podcast episode where we talked about Censor, I think, like, I've received some comments about it already from some of our listeners. Like, they could hear my excitement for that movie. Like, they made a comment to me, just like, wow, you really like that movie. I'm just like, I don't want to spoil the surprise, but yeah, it's my number 1 movie of the year.
I knew you loved it. I just didn't know you loved it that much. That is wild.
Yeah. And I think I really enjoy that horror genre, and I think this one just really stands up there. And like, obviously, like, Night House was number 3 for me, and number 2 for you. Is just, these movies are like, it was a good year for horror, really. Oh, yeah. Like I said, it worked from beginning to end, and I think I'm a sucker for. I mean, we talked about The Green Knight and like the hero journey as like that archetype of story. I think I might be a real sucker for this journey into madness archetype of story. Yeah. Like, this is very plainly a descent into chaos for our protagonist here. And I loved every second. I was just like questioning what's real, what's not real. And I love the setting, like sort of the meta. This is a movie taking place in the movie industry, and it had me going out researching more on that video nasties 1980s UK censorship heavy film industry and time period.
Well, then there was like a movie within the movie as well. So it's like a movie about movies with movies in it.
Right? And the final levels of the descent are so important in the madness journey. And this one, I loved how they did. To me, it was unique. They were changing the aspect ratio of the film. I feel like the film stock was changing. Things were going on my screen that weren't necessarily going on for the characters in the movie. Like I was being treated to another layer of that feeling that our protagonist is going into here. So it's a combination of the whole thing. Go ahead.
Well, I like what you said, because like Censor is telling a story in the medium of film that can only be told using that medium.
Yeah.
Right. We're talking about those specific tools. And that's what I appreciated about it as well. Is like, like you can't do that. You couldn't do the same thing with a book or anything else. It's like it's using the tools of that specific medium in very unique ways to explore a story that could only be told in that medium. So I thought that's really unique. That's
it kind of reminds me of this GameCube game called Eternal Darkness from the early 2000s, where it takes advantage of the medium it's on, where it's again a descent into madness. And the more insane your character goes, your system actually does things. It'll bring up like a fake, your memory card is corrupted. And it looks like a legit message that the game presents you. And you're thinking, oh my goodness, my game system is messing up. And then that goes away. And then all of a sudden your controls might get reversed. And you're thinking, oh, my control sticks are falling into disrepair here. Like things are taking advantage of the medium that they're in. And Censor does this for movies as well.
Yeah.
Really fantastic. I got to point out a couple other things here too, where this movie was super short. It's 84 minutes. And we've talked about in the past, like efficient filmmaking. And there's not a single minute wasted on screen here. This is the feature film directorial debut of Prano Bailey-Bond. She does a fantastic job. I don't know how she could follow up this with anything at this point. Maybe just retire now on these laurels of greatness, right? But I need to see more of what she does. Possibly, the best film. I'm putting it at the top of my 2020 list. We need to see more of this. I couldn't get enough of it. I loved it so much.
Absolutely.
I watched it, and then I think 2 weeks later, I watched it again in preparation for recording our podcast episode about it. And I was loving it every second. It's not like I was getting distracted throughout. And that's extraordinarily rare that I watch a movie within 14 days of each viewing and still walk away with it with so much greatness in tow. Really fantastic. And I know you talked about it before. That's I don't know if you have anything else to say about it, or do you just want to head into your number one? This is your number one film of 2021.
Number one film of 2021. It's a movie that you've already mentioned, but for me, it's got to be Pig.
Incredible.
Pig was just, again, I think it was a debut feature film from Michael Sarnowski.
Yep.
But Pig, it really did blow me away. The marketing did not do it any favors. Again, it got that sense of like, oh, this is going to be a John Wick style revenge movie. Mm-hmm. And it ended up being this somber meditation on grief and loss and being true to oneself. And, like we talked about, I think in our podcast, and you mentioned before about like, really relishing those moments in your life, those really special moments, because they are transitory and they don't come around that often. So like that metaphor of food, about savoring the moments, both literally and metaphorically. Yeah. Wow. Like just in terms of the direction, but in terms of the writing, in terms of the acting, I mean, this is Nick Cage at his best. Then you have Alex Wolff. Again, another one of those up-and-comer actors who I'm super excited to see what he does next. He was also in another favorite movie of mine from a couple years back called Hereditary. A horror movie, completely different, but like, and just the journey that Nicolas Cage's and Alex Wolff's characters go on in terms of having to deal with, loss of loved ones and how to process that grief. And it's such I think it's a universal kind of theme that we can all relate to.
Definitely.
But just the way it's done is so powerful. And the word that is maybe the adjective that is not always associated with Nicolas Cage is subtle.
Yeah.
But you just look at the subtlety of his performance in this, and how, I guess, restrained maybe he is. Yeah, just the whole movie. It was one of those ones again. I went out and picked this thing up at full price. Usually I'll wait for a movie to come down a bit into my budget range. But yeah, for Pig and The Night House, both of them, I immediately went out after watching these movies and picked them up on physical media as well. We talked about this at length, all the themes in Pig, and the plotting and the pacing and just how everything's kind of tied together. And I think, it blew away any expectations I had. It was one of my favorite films that I've seen in the past several years. It stuck with me. I mean, ever since I watched it, and this was got to be like 4 or 5 months ago by this point.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it is, but there's not a day that goes by, I don't think, where I haven't thought about Pig in some way, whether it's just, in terms of I'm telling people about this movie, because people know from work, we're on Zoom calls now, and my movie's in the background. Yeah. People, it's like, I'm the movie guy. It's like, well, what would you recommend? Is like Pig. It's like my first pick right now. It's like recent movies. I will recommend Pig all day long. Just in terms of thematically, I mean, going through life and going through, maybe it's being in the pandemic and having to deal with all those, like all of these different emotions, not exactly grief, but maybe akin to grief, and having to process all the negativity and the psychological baggage that we're carrying around. And just like it's a bittersweet film, but at the end, I think it's an overall uplifting message about, acceptance and, about really confronting those negative emotions kind of head on, or those negative experiences head on, and forcing yourself to process them and come to terms with, some of the bad things that have happened, so that you can, come to terms with your past, so that you can move forward into the future. I think that's such a powerful message in any time, but especially for anybody who's going through any kind of loss of a loved one. And I think just in general, in these times, in pandemic times, when we're dealing with all this extra fear and anxiety, and to have that kind of that message of catharsis, I think it was just so powerful. Maybe it was being in the right time in the right place, but like Nicolas Cage at his peak, just I think filmmaking at its peak, storytelling at its peak, just in terms of like everything, like you said, it's like conservation of storytelling. Everything is down at bare bones minimum. It's not a 3-hour, 4-hour epic movie. It's a efficiently told story as well. Just everything about it's not flashy. It's not in your face. The shots are very kind of, there's not a lot of kinetic energy in the shots, not a whole lot of movement, but they're so powerful. Yeah. Just everything about the movie just hit me in the right way. And Nicolas Cage is one of those actors who was in one of my favorite and one of my least favorite movies this year. He's like, not because of him, but it's just the range of movies he's in. But number one pick for me for 2021 has got to be Pig.
Absolutely fantastic. Like it was an incredible movie and well worth anyone's time to watch. Really great top pick. That's a solid list of top 10 movies for both of us, I think. Like, obviously, we do have a couple overlapping entries, and I think that speaks to how our taste in movies and how they do overlap themselves. Yeah. We do tend to agree quite a bit when we're talking about various movies, and we really focus on ones that we really enjoy.
I was really surprised that you didn't have The French Dispatch on there. I thought for sure, because you're a huge Wes Anderson guy. I thought for sure that would be on there.
Like the thing is, like Royal Tenenbaums is probably one of my favorite. Like if I did a top 10 of all time, Royal Tenenbaums is probably in that list.
Wow.
I have probably seen almost every one of his movies in theaters except for Bottle Rocket, the first one. And I don't want to miss any of his movies, but I don't find myself revisiting them very often. Some of his early work, Life Aquatic, again, I've seen that half a dozen times. It's fantastic. French Dispatch, it could have been easily on the top 10, but I think there were more important films for me to put on than that one. Like that one, I think technically might have been like 12 or 13. But that just goes back to how, like, that bottom of the list is so interchangeable with different entries. I mean, it could have been an honorable mention as well, but.
Yeah. No, I'm just not good or bad. I was just like, some of your picks really did surprise me, and in a good way. It was good. Like, some of these movies I'm going to have to actually, they're on my list. I just haven't checked them out yet, but I'm looking forward to, now that you've, like, the Tragedy of Macbeth and a few other ones that I haven't seen yet. I'm really looking forward to these ones now.
I was surprised Matrix Resurrection's way up there too. That one I was legit surprised at.
Yeah, like I was honestly, even as a fan of the Matrix, I was not expecting big things out of this movie. You know, like 20 year later, sequels are really, really hit and miss.
Right.
And that's what, like, the fact that it was so good and so relevant and so true to the original movies while still being its own thing and being different. I mean, it just, like, it did blow my mind. I was pleasantly surprised.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Real Film Chronicles podcast. Thank you for listening and hanging out with us today. We really appreciate your support and look forward to you joining us for the next episode. We can be found around the internet and social media, with our home base being realfilmchronicles.com, which will have all the links you need to follow and keep in touch with us. If you have a moment, we'd really appreciate if you could leave some feedback, such as a rating on Apple Podcasts or on whatever platform you're listening on. And feel free to send us an email to realfilmchronicles@outlook.com. We love some suggestions, questions, or general comments and would enjoy including them on an upcoming episode. Until next time, take care of yourself and others and keep your film journey going.